Today we are going to be talking about chapters 14 and 15. The start of the Civil War showed much promise for the North. There were railroads that played a vital role in the war effort and lots of propaganda used to try to motivate the American people. Both sides were very unprepared and found challenges with feeding the troops. The first Battle of Bull Run showed that the war was going to be a gruesome one. It was the first battle of the war, and shockingly, the Confederates won. The first victory for the North was led by Ulysses Grant when they captured Forts Henry and Donelson in Tennessee. Emancipation was a big topic of discussion during the Civil War, and the North knew that the ending of slavery would lead to the downfall of the Southern economy. On September 22, 1862, Lincoln issued the first Emancipation Proclamation, which was officially signed on January 1, 1863. Now with the Emancipation Proclamation signed, black men were allowed to enlist in the military. Over 180,000 black men had served in the Union Army, and most black soldiers were emancipated slaves who joined the Army in the South. Due to increased debts from the war, there was a new financial policy put in place, which increased tariff, created new taxes on goods, created the first income tax, and bonds. Women played a key role in helping out with war efforts and were stepping into the public circle. Women like Clara Barton, who was the president of the National Red Cross, lobbied for the U.S. to endorse the Geneva Convention of 1864. The Confederate president, Jefferson Davis, lacked communication to the men and women of the South. Under him, there was an overproduction of cotton, which led to a worldwide crisis, driving the prices of cotton far down. Unlike the North, the South's economy was in crisis during the war. Southerners who were loyal to the Union made a significant contribution into the victory of the North. The war placed large burdens on Southern white women when their husbands would flee due to their debts. There was also a shortage of manpower, which led to the South arming slaves to fight for them. Gettysburg and Vicksburg were two battles that were turning points in the war. They were both Union victories, and Vicksburg led to the Union gaining control of the Mississippi River, and Gettysburg ended Confederates' last major invasion of the North. In the election of 1864, Republicans nominated John C. Fremont, and the Democratic candidate was General George B. McClellan. With the war drawing to a close, Lincoln adopted his 10% plan of Reconstruction. The 13th Amendment was finally approved on January 31, 1865, and General Lee finally surrendered to Grant at Appomattox on April 9th. Lincoln was fatally shot and killed on April 12th, and then the Civil War laid the foundation for a more modern America.
So now we are going to be moving on to Chapter 15, the overthrow of Reconstruction. And just a reminder, Reconstruction is the period after the Civil War in the United States when the Southern states were reorganized and re-entered into the Union. Now we're going to talk about free black families. They were shaped by their slave experiences like separation of families, denial of access to education, and sexual exploitation of black women. African Americans also celebrated their culture and liberation through church meetings, black schools, and they spent more time with their families. African Americans also came together in conventions, parades, and petition drives to protest for the right to vote. They organized 4th of July celebrations to demonstrate their patriotism, and some white people did not celebrate it because African Americans were celebrating it. Now we're going to talk about the Freedmen's Bureau. It was created in 1865 and it ended in 1870. It was an experiment in government social policy, and its goals was to establish schools, help the poor, and settle disputes between white and black people. The achievements were education and healthcare, and they also helped to finance northern schools for black education, but they failed at establishing schools, and this was very problematic for the economy. Sharecropping was very common during this time. It was a compromise between blacks wanting land and planters' demand for labor. Each black family rented a section of land, and they would divide the crops between the family and the planter who owns the plantations. After slavery, former slaves withdrew women from the fields and they tried to buy land. They wanted to grow crops for international market and for their families. From 1865 to 1869, Andrew Johnson was the Republican president. He grew up poor, and he was known as the honest yeoman. He defended the Union, he came from a seceded state, and he did not like large planters. He was unsuited for big responsibilities, unlike President Lincoln. And he also supported emancipation, which was the freeing of slaves. However, he did not want African Americans to play a role in Reconstruction. Black codes were created and there were laws passed by new Southern governments. They attempted to control former slaves' lives, like legalized marriage, limited access to courts, couldn't testify against whites, couldn't vote or be on the jury, and whoever failed to sign yearly labor contracts could be arrested and hired to white plant owners, and this was kind of like another form of slavery. In December of 1865, Johnson announced the nation was reunited. Radical Republicans wanted new governments with rebels not controlling them, and they were also for the African Americans' right to vote. They agreed the Union victory created an opportunity for equal rights, and they were fine with federal and state governments as long as equal rights were made. Charles Sumner and Thaddeus Stevens were the most prominent radical Republicans in Congress. They were against slavery and they were for African American rights. The Civil Rights Bill was passed in 1866, and it basically said if people were born in the United States and they were citizens, this was an example of equality before government. The 14th Amendment was also ratified in 1866, and it said everyone born in the United States is considered a citizen. The government cannot deny any person of the equal protection of the laws, and it also included due process. Every state in the South besides Tennessee refused to ratify the 14th Amendment, so in response, the Construction Act was ratified, temporarily dividing the South into 5 military districts. This was adopted over Johnson's veto. 1867 was a very big year because the Tenure of Office Act also was ratified, and it barred the president from removing certain office holders. Johnson thought this was unconstitutional, and he removed someone after, then he was impeached in a result of that. In 1869, the 15th Amendment was ratified, and it prohibited the federal and state governments from denying any citizens the right to vote because of their race. People got around this by providing literacy tests, property qualifications, and poll taxes. During Radical Reconstruction, there were derogatory terms invented for white Republicans. Carpetbaggers were from the North, and they were white Republicans who moved to the South after the war. Scalawags were white Republicans from the South. In 1865, the Ku Klux Klan was created, and it was a terrorist group and a secret society in the South preventing blacks from voting. President Grant put an end to it by 1872, and in response, he ratified the Enforcement Act, and it outlawed terrorist groups and allowed presidents to use army against them. Liberal Republicans, they added more racism in the North, and they wanted to restore white power, and they were also called the Redeemers because they wanted to redeem white power in politics. The Civil Rights Act of 1875 was also ratified, and it outlawed racial discrimination in public places. Now, at the end of the decade, after the election of 1876 between Hayes and Tilden, the bargain of 1877 was created. The bargain was that Hayes would take office with no recount of the votes, but he would have to withdraw the federal troops from the South. When he withdrew the federal troops from the South, Reconstruction was declared over.